For 15 years, I worked as a commercial diver for an oil company, inspecting and repairing offshore rigs. It was an isolated job, one that required long stretches at sea, but I loved it. There was something about being underwater, surrounded by nothing but silence and the rhythmic sound of my own breathing, that made me feel at peace. The world above faded away, and it was just me and the deep. Most of my dives were routine. I would strap into my gear, run through the safety protocols with my team, and descend into the darkness, checking welds, looking for corrosion, ensuring the structure was sound. I had done it so many times, it had become second nature. I had dived in storms and rough seas, in waters where I could barely see a foot in front of me. I had encountered sharks, massive fish, and even the occasional pod of dolphins passing through. None of it ever shook me. The ocean was vast, mysterious, but I understood it. At least, I thought I did. There was one dive, one routine, unforgettable dive, that changed everything. That day, the water was calm. Visibility was decent at the surface, the sun cutting through the waves and shimmering against the steel beams of the rig. It was just a standard inspection. Nothing unusual. I went through my pre-dive checks with my team topside, made sure my air supply was good, confirmed that my safety line was secure. A second diver stood by in case something went wrong, but nothing ever did. I was in and out in 45 minutes every time. I dropped into the water and began my descent. The first 50 feet were clear, easy. Sunlight still reached me, and I could see the rig structure stretching downwards, disappearing into the shadows below. The deeper I went, the darker it became. That was normal. I had worked in these conditions for years and knew how quickly visibility could change. I followed the steel beams down, methodically moving through my checklist. Everything looked fine. No major corrosion, no structural issues. The water was still, unnervingly quiet. Even the usual small fish that hung around the rig seemed scarce that day. Then I saw it, a shadow, drifting just at the edge of my vision. I stopped, gripping the beam beside me. It was massive, not just a school of fish or a shifting current, but something big. It moved slowly, gliding through the water with an eerie smoothness. I had seen plenty of large fish before, even sharks, but something about its shape felt different. It was deliberate, purposeful. I watched it for a moment, trying to make out more details, but then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I shook it off and continued my inspection. I had a job to do, and letting my mind play tricks on me wasn't going to help. I moved to the next section of the rig, scanning the beams, running my hands along the metal, checking for anything out of place. And then the shadow reappeared, and I saw what it was. A shark, a big one. It was easily 15, maybe 16 feet long, its massive body cutting through the water with slow, confident movements. I had seen sharks before, but this one was different. It was old, its skin scarred and marked from years of battles in the deep. I hovered in place, watching it pass. There was no fear, only admiration. Sharks weren't the mindless killers people made them out to be. If you left them alone, they'd leave you alone. They were ancient, perfect predators, rulers of the ocean in their own right. For a brief moment, I almost wish I had a camera. Then, everything changed. Something surged up from below. 1 second, the shark was there, gliding effortlessly through the water. The next, it was thrashing, its powerful body convulsing as something wrapped around it. Tentacles. Long, pale limbs covered in rows of dark, circular suckers shot up from the depths, coiling around the shark's body with terrifying speed. The shark twisted violently, fighting, its muscles flexing as it tried to escape. But it was useless. The tentacles tightened, pulling it downwards. That's when I saw what they belonged to. A squid. A giant squid. But this wasn't like any squid I had ever seen. It was too big. Its body alone was the size of a bus. Its skin an inky black that made it nearly invisible in the deep. Its tentacles stretched well beyond 100 feet, each one as thick as a man's torso, covered in suckers large enough to grip and crush bone. And then I saw the eye. A massive, unblinking alien eye, the size of a dinner plate, staring directly at me. A cold, primal terror gripped me. The shark was gone in an instant, yanked downwards in a burst of blood and bubbles. The water around me shifted, currents pulling at my body as the thing moved, as if it were adjusting its focus. I knew I had to get out. My hands found the steel beam, and I climbed, kicking off the structure, propelling myself upward as fast as I could. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, the sound of it deafening in my helmet. Every instinct screamed at me not to look down. I felt the safety line tighten as my team topside started pulling me up. The water rushed past me, my heart hammering in my chest. The pressure in my ears shifted as I climbed higher, closer to the surface. I didn't stop, didn't slow. Breaking the surface felt like waking from a nightmare. The moment I was out of the water, I tore off my mask, gasping for air. My team was already at my side, pulling me onto the platform, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion. I told them what I saw. They didn't question me. They knew I wasn't the kind of guy to make up stories. I'd been diving for years. I'd seen more of the ocean than most people ever would. But this was something else. I still dive, I still work the rigs, but I've never forgotten that day. Because I know now that the ocean isn't just home to sharks and fish and harmless creatures. There are things down there, things we aren't supposed to see, things that don't belong in our world. And if you're unlucky enough to encounter one, you might not make it back. I've always considered myself a nomad, living life on my own terms. My truck is my home. Its covered bed converted into a cozy space where I can sleep, eat, and store everything I need. Utah's vast deserts are my backyard, and their rugged beauty and endless skies, nights under the stars are what I live for. In my years of roaming, I've seen things most people wouldn't believe. UFOs? Pretty common, honestly. Strange lights, odd shapes darting through the night. They're fascinating, but never frightening. At least, they weren't. Not until last summer. It was a day like any other. I was driving along on the dirt roads in the Snow Canyon State Park, the sun hanging high in the sky. Despite its name, Snow Canyon isn't cold. It was about 95 degrees that day, which is mild for the summer out here. I found a spot to park my truck, a perfect little nook surrounded by sandstone cliffs, and set up for the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky erupted into a sea of stars. No matter how many times I see it, the night sky out here always leaves me breathless. Instead of staying in the truck, I decided to set up my hammock between two sturdy rocks and enjoy the cool night air. I laid back, letting the silence of the desert wash over me. Then I heard it. A howl. Not a coyote or a wolf. I know those sounds well. This was different. Deeper, stranger. A shiver ran down my spine as I sat up, scanning the darkness. I saw nothing. Just endless expanse of desert. The sound seemed distant, but it put me on edge. I got up and walked to my truck, pulling out my night vision goggles. Sitting on the tailgate, I scanned the direction of the sound. Nothing. Just rocky terrain and empty desert. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was just probably an animal that I hadn't encountered before. Maybe it was better not to know. I put the goggles down and returned to my hammock, though part of me wanted to crawl into the truck for the night. I almost fell asleep when it came again. The howl. This time, it was much closer. My eyes snapped open, and I nearly fell out of the hammock. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the goggles and scanned the area again. Still nothing. But the sound. There was no way it wasn't nearby. I decided to pack up. Whatever it was, I didn't want to find out. I pulled the hammock down and tossed it into the truck, slamming the tailgate. As I walked around to the driver's side, I froze. Standing there next to my truck was a girl. She looked to be about 15 or 16, her clothes worn and dusty. She didn't look like someone who should be out here at all. I yelled, startled, then apologized for scaring her. She just stood there, staring at me. I asked her if she was okay and where her parents were. She told me she was lost. Something about her unsettled me. I asked her name. No response. I asked her where her parents were. Still nothing. She just repeated, "I'm lost," and pointed into the desert. The direction she pointed made no sense. There was nothing out there for miles. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't just abandon her. Trying to stay calm, I told her I could call someone who can come help her. Then she demanded why I couldn't take her home. I froze. My body felt paralyzed as she stepped closer. Her eyes, they started to glow. A dull yellow light, like embers in a dying fire. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. My flight response kicked in, and I bolted for the passenger side of my truck. Slamming the door shut, I locked it and scrambled into my driver's seat. My hands shook as I looked back to where she had been standing. She was gone. I scanned the desert, but there was no sign of her. Then I heard it, that same howl, now right in front of the truck. I turned the key, firing up the engine, and switched on the headlights. The beam illuminated something that I still have nightmares about to this day, and it was standing right in front of my truck. It was a wolf. But it wasn't just any wolf. This thing was massive, its head almost level with my window, its glowing yellow eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. I didn't wait. Slamming the truck into drive, I sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. I didn't stop driving for hours, not until I reached a city and found a motel for the night. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, but deep down I know it wasn't just a wolf, and that girl, she wasn't human. People tell stories about skinwalkers in the area, shapeshifters, beings that can mimic humans and animals. I've always thought of them as legends, nothing more, but now I'm not so sure. I haven't gone back to Snow Canyon since. I've even thought about giving up this life, buying a house, settling down somewhere far from here, because whatever that was, it wasn't something I ever want to see again. There's something about rowing that makes me feel alive. The rhythm of the oars cutting through the water, the way the boat glides effortlessly, the endless stretch of blue surrounding me. Nothing else in the world compares. It's the ultimate workout, the kind that tests your endurance and leaves you feeling completely drained but satisfied. That's why, even outside of my university's rowing team practices, I'd take my own boat out onto Lake Champlain whenever I had the chance. It was my escape, my personal challenge. And I never went alone. Lucky, my black lab, was always my companion. He loved the water just as much as I did, if not more. Every time I set the boat in the water, he'd leap in excitedly, tail wagging, ready for another adventure. That Saturday was no different. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, light breeze, sun high in the sky. No obligations, no distractions. Just me, my boat, and my dog. I set my goal, as I always did. Row 5 miles out, to the spot where both shorelines disappeared, where it felt like I was rowing in the middle of the ocean. That sense of being completely alone, surrounded by only vastness of the lake, gave me an adrenaline rush. It was exhilarating. The way there was smooth, no other boats in sight, which was unusual but welcome. I pushed myself harder, determined to beat my best time. My arms burned, sweat dripped down my back, but I kept going. Finally, just a few minutes over an hour, I reached my destination. I let the boat drift, stretching out my sore muscles. Lucky sat in the front, panting happily, taking in the endless water around us. I reached for my water bottle and protein bar, letting myself enjoy the stillness. Out of nowhere, Lucky started barking. It was abrupt, sharp, and it was wrong. Lucky never barked unless something was really wrong. His ears were pinned back, his body tense. He was staring off to the left of the boat, completely fixated on something in the water. I followed his gaze, scanning the surface. Nothing, just gentle ripples. Then I saw it. Something just beneath the water. It was hard to make out, just a dark shape, a few feet under the surface, moving steadily in our direction. At first I thought it was a log, but logs don't move like that. A few moments later, something broke the surface. It was fast, a brief fleeting glimpse, just long enough for me to see what it looked like. A head. An animal's head. But not like anything I had ever seen before. I barely had time to process it before I realized something terrifying. It was huge, and it was coming straight for us. Panic set in. My hands scrambled for the oars, heart pounding. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I didn't want to be anywhere near it. Then, the water exploded. A massive body surfaced, glistening and wet, sending waves crashing into my boat. At least 15, maybe 20 feet long. A long serpentine neck, dark greenish-gray skin, and ridges running down its back. I had seen this before. Not in real life, but in blurry photos and grainy videos and legends. It looked exactly like the Loch Ness Monster, except this wasn't Scotland. This was Lake Champlain. Champ. That's what they called it. The local legend, the supposed lake monster. I had always thought it was just a story, something for tourists, a myth. But this thing, this enormous living thing, was real, and I was in the water with it. Before I could react, my boat lurched, the impact sending me flying, cold water swallowing me whole. I tumbled, disoriented, spinning in the depths, my lungs screaming. Then, movement. Something enormous passed right by me. For the briefest moment, I saw it in full. Its long tail, powerful, cutting through the water. Its massive body gliding just feet away from me. It wasn't attacking, it was just there, moving, existing in the same space as me. Forgetting everything else, I kicked hard, breaking the surface, gasping for air. Lucky was already in the boat, barking frantically. I didn't even stop to think. I reached for the edge, threw myself over, and pulled myself in. My hands were shaking, my breathing was erratic, but I was alive, and I needed to get out of there. I rode like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. Every stroke burned, my arms felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following me. By the time I reached the dock, I was drenched, exhausted, and shaking. But I had beaten my best time, 40 minutes. I was pretty sure that was an Olympic level pace. That night, I did something that I've never done before. I researched. I read everything I could about Champ, the eyewitness accounts, the old photographs, the legends passed down for centuries. I had never believed in it before. I do now. I don't think it wanted to hurt me. If it did, it easily could have. It was just there, part of the lake, something that had been hiding for longer than any of us realized. But I never rowed out to that spot again. I still love the water. I still love rowing. But now I know that some places aren't meant to be explored. I've been on the force for nearly 20 years now, patrolling the same small city in a rural county that borders a state park. It's a quiet place, and crime is mostly petty thefts or the occasional bar fight. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of oddities, but nothing could have prepared me for that night a few years ago. It was just another night shift, patrolling the quiet streets with my partner Andrew. We were doing our usual rounds when a call came in over the radio from dispatch. A local had reported a possible break-in. The caller was vague, saying someone might be trying to break into their house. Break-ins are rare here, so Andrew and I immediately perked up. I grabbed the address and switched on the lights, heading straight there. We pulled into the driveway, and I instantly recognized the house. It belonged to Henry, an older man known around town as a local drunk. I thought it seemed more likely that Henry had a few too many rather than there being an actual break-in. Andrew shot me a look, rolling his eyes, and I knew he was thinking the same thing. Still, we got out of the car, flashlight in hand, and approached cautiously. I went up to the front door, while Andrew circled around to check the side of the house. I knocked, and Henry answered almost immediately. I asked him what was going on, expecting a rambling story about shadows or noises. Instead, Henry told me he'd been watching TV when he heard a noise from the backyard. His dog had started barking like crazy, so he got up to check. When he opened the back door, his dog bolted out towards the large shed at the back of his property. Henry followed the dog to the porch and shined his flashlight outside. He said he saw someone, move into his shed. He insisted it wasn't an animal, it was walking on two legs. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but something about the way Henry's dog was hiding under the table, whimpering, sent a shiver up my spine. I told Henry to stay inside and lock the door. I made my way out back, moving towards the shed, where I saw Andrew standing, his gun drawn. This stopped me in my tracks. Andrew wasn't the type to draw his weapon unless absolutely necessary. I approached slowly, my own hand hovering over my holster. I quietly asked him what was going on. He mentioned for me to come closer. I could see his hand trembling, his gun still aimed at the shed. I'd never seen Andrew this shaken before. He was always calm, collected. Seeing him like that put me on edge. I asked him again what was going on. He said he didn't know, his voice barely above a whisper. But then he said there's something in there, and it's not human. Before I could ask him what he meant, a loud bang echoed from inside the shed. I drew my gun, aiming it at the door. My heart was pounding. I shouted for whoever was inside to come out with their hands up. There was a moment of silence, and then we heard a noise that sent chills down my spine. A mix between a hiss and a howl, unlike anything I've ever heard. I shined my flashlight towards the shed and saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from the darkness. A figure stepped forward, slowly moving into the beam of my light. What I saw, it defied all logic. It looked like some unholy mix between a human and an alligator, standing on two legs. Its face was elongated, like a reptile's, but its body was vaguely humanoid, with long arms that ended in webbed claws. I stepped back instinctively, my gun shaking in my hands. I glanced at Andrew, who was as pale as a ghost, his eyes wide with terror. We both knew there was no protocol for this. What do you do when you're faced with something that shouldn't exist? The creature let out another blood-curdling noise and suddenly charged at us. I fell backwards, firing my gun. I honestly don't even know if any of my rounds hit it, but if they did, they had no effect. The creature moved faster than anything I'd ever seen and vanished into the dense woods behind the shed. Andrew helped me to my feet, both of us breathing hard, our minds struggling to process what we had just witnessed. From the front porch we heard Henry shouting, asking us what was happening. Andrew fumbled for his radio, calling for backup, but he didn't say what we'd seen. How could he? Who would believe us? Within minutes, more squad cars arrived. The police chief was among them, demanding an explanation. Andrew and I exchanged a glance. There was no way that we could tell them the truth. It was too insane, too unbelievable. It was a bear, Andrew finally said, his voice steadying as he spoke the lie. I nodded in agreement. We both wrote up our statements, each detailing some fabricated story of a bear attack. Henry didn't question it. He hadn't seen the creature himself, and that was probably for the best. Andrew and I never spoke about that night again, but every time I patrol near the edge of those woods, I find myself glancing into the darkness, wondering if it's still out there, watching, wondering if it will come back. A few months ago, I was called into a situation that still haunts me. I've spent most of my life exploring caves, mapping unknown systems, and even assisting in search and rescue missions. When I got a call that a hiker had gone missing near the Jewel Cave system, I didn't think twice. The area they were lost in was one I knew well, an uncharted, off-limits section I had spent countless hours mapping. I called it the Abyss. The name wasn't an exaggeration. This section was treacherous, with winding tunnels, unstable passages, and a sheer 100-foot drop-off into a pit so dark and vast, it seemed to swallow light. When I arrived, the police filled me in. A 26-year-old woman named Claire had been separated from her group. She was last seen near a blocked-off passage. I couldn't shake the thought that if she'd fallen into that pit, her chances of survival were slim. Time was critical. I grabbed my gear and headed into the cave system, navigating with the ease of familiarity. Even after all these years, I could have moved through these tunnels blindfolded. After about 30 minutes, I reached the split where Claire had gone missing. One path led deeper into the map system, while the other was blocked off, dangerous and unmapped. If she'd gone anywhere, it was through the latter. Pushing past the barriers, I scanned for any signs of Claire. It didn't take long to find a climbing glove lying on the ground. It was small, probably hers. I called out, my voice echoing endlessly through the tunnels, but there was no response. I moved further in, the air growing colder and stiller. Eventually, I reached another fork. The left path led to the pit, the abyss. The right, I knew, sloped downward into partially submerged tunnels, an area so dangerous it had been left unmapped. I decided to check the pit first. If Claire was down there, I needed to confirm it before risking the submerged tunnels. When I reached the drop-off, I peered over the edge into the black void. I pulled out a couple of glow sticks, cracking them and tossing them over. They landed with faint greenish light that barely illuminated the bottom. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw movement. Something shifted in the shadows. My heart raced. I called out, and to my shock, I heard a faint reply. A woman's voice. Claire. She was alive. I yelled down, telling her to stay still. My radio wasn't getting a signal this deep in, so I had no way to call for backup. There was no time to waste. Securing my ropes, I set up 2 rappel lines, one for me and one for Claire, and began my descent. The drop was harrowing. The pit seemed to swallow sound, leaving me alone with the scrape of rope against rock and the pounding of my heart. Finally, I reached the bottom. I scanned the dimly lit space with my flashlight. Leaning against the wall was a woman, Claire. I rushed to her, asking her if she was injured. She was remarkably unscathed. No broken bones, no cuts, nothing to indicate she'd fallen such a distance. Her face, however, was pale with terror. I asked her how she got down here. The terror on her face became more apparent by the moment. She started to scream, clawing her way up the walls of the pit. It took several minutes to calm her down enough to speak. Her story chilled me to my core. She explained how she'd lingered at the split, curious about the blocked-off path. As she stood there, something hit her, hard. She blacked out and woke up at the bottom of the pit. Scanning her surroundings with her flashlight, she initially thought she was alone. Then she heard something, a scraping noise. She pointed to a large rock near the wall and said it moved, revealing a hidden tunnel. From that tunnel emerged something not human. She described it as 10 feet tall, muscular, and humanoid, but with glowing green eyes and 2 massive protruding teeth. It didn't speak, but it did drag her into a makeshift camp, a fire and a hut in a larger chamber. The floor was littered with bones, some unmistakably human. At one point, the creature went to its hut, leaving Claire alone. She took the opportunity to escape, running blindly until she ended up back at the pit. She said she didn't remember how she got there, just that she passed out from fear. I wanted to dismiss her story as hysteria or hallucination, shock and dehydration playing tricks on her mind. But how did she end up in the pit, without a scratch? There was no time to question it. We needed to get out. I secured Claire to the second rappel line, and we began the climb. She was calmer now, though her hands still trembled as they gripped the rope. We were nearing the top when I heard it, a sound from the pit below. It was a deep, resonant thud, like a boulder crashing against rock. I glanced down. The bottom of the pit was glowing, an eerie orange light, just like what Claire had described. Then I saw it. A massive figure emerged from the tunnel, silhouetted against the glow. It stood still for a moment, and then it looked up. Even from that distance, I could see its eyes, 2 green orbs cutting through the darkness. Claire began to sob, whispering its back. I yelled for her to keep climbing. We reached the top, and I scrambled to pull her over the edge. Just as I did, a deafening roar echoed from below. A sound so unnatural, it froze me in place. Leaving my gear behind, I grabbed Claire and ran. We didn't stop until we were outside. The police rushed to Claire, but as they loaded her into an ambulance, she glanced back at me. Her eyes were full of gratitude and fear. A few days later, we met up to discuss what we saw. We agreed to keep quiet. No one would believe us, and we didn't want anyone venturing into that cursed section of the cave. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if we made the right choice. What if it takes someone else? Could I face that thing again if I had to? I pray I never find out. I've known Travis, Chase, and Jay since elementary school. We went through high school together, and 3 of us even ended up at the same college. Over the years, we've been inseparable. But now, with families and jobs, getting together isn't as easy as it used to be. That's why every summer, without fail, we plan a trip just for the 4 of us. We spend all winter deciding where to go, making plans, and booking everything. It's a commitment we've made to each other. No matter what, we all have to go. This story is about the trip we took to Mexico last summer. The first half was in Cancun, where we rented an Airbnb and soaked in the sights, enjoyed some beer, and relaxed on the beaches. We even took excursions to see the old Mayan ruins. It was a blast. The second half of the trip was what I was most excited about. We rented a large fishing boat with cabins and decided to spend the next few days out in the Gulf of Mexico, deep sea fishing and enjoying the open water. The boat was a big one, built for serious fishing with a spacious deck and a few cabins below. Travis, the most experienced among us when it came to boating, convinced us he could handle it. He spent so much time on his own boat back home, it seemed like a no-brainer. So we packed up, stocked the boat with food and drinks, and left the port with the sun still high in the sky. The first day was perfect. We cruised around, played some music, and had a few beers. As the sun began to set, we anchored down, fired up the grill, and reminisced about our old college days. Eventually, we turned in for the night, each of us claiming a bunk in the large cabin below deck. Even after the lights were out, we continued our conversations until, one by one, we all drifted off to sleep. I don't know what woke me up, but suddenly I was wide awake in the dark cabin. The boat was rocking a little more than before. I lay there for a minute, trying to figure out why I was awake, when I heard it, a loud thud from underneath the boat. The whole vessel rocked, much harder than any wave we'd felt so far. I sat up, my heart pounding. Something had definitely just hit us. Not knowing much about boats, I couldn't tell if we were in any danger, but my gut told me to tell Travis. I went to his bunk and shook him awake. Groggy and confused, he asked me what was going on. I told him about the noise and the way the boat moved. He got up, still half asleep, and said we should check it out. We grabbed a flashlight and went to the deck. The night was calm, the sea was still. Using a large spotlight, we shined it over the water, searching for anything that could have hit us. But the water was empty, nothing in sight. Travis walked the perimeter of the boat, looking for damage or anything out of the ordinary, but found nothing. He asked me if I was sure I heard something. I started to doubt myself. Maybe it was just a dream. After a few minutes of searching and finding nothing, we decided it was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. We went back to the cabin and settled down, as I tried to push the weird moment out of my mind. The next day, I woke up later than everyone else. I went through my morning routine, brushed my teeth, changed my clothes, and headed up to the deck. Chase was making breakfast on a griddle, while Jay and Travis were pulling up the anchor. I sat down next to Chase, and we chatted for a bit. When breakfast was ready, we took our time eating, talking about where we would go for our first day of fishing. After breakfast, Travis went to start the boat, but the engine made a strange noise, a loud, grating sound that was definitely not normal. Travis immediately killed the engine and came back to the deck. I asked him what was wrong, and he said there might be a problem with the motor. We all gathered around as he raised the motor out of the water. As soon as it was up, we saw the problem. Two of the metal blades on one side were completely twisted, like they had been hit by something heavy. We all racked our brains, trying to remember if we'd hit anything the day before, but none of us could. Then I remembered the noise from last night. Chase and Jay looked at me, confused, so I explained to them what happened. Travis nodded, saying it didn't make sense that something had hit the motor, but what could be strong enough to bend metal like that? We debated for a while about what to do next. Chase asked if the boat could still run, and Travis said it was probably good enough to get us back to the port, but we shouldn't go any further out. Jay groaned, not wanting to cut the trip short. He suggested we just stay and fish for the day. Travis agreed that if we left the motor up, it wouldn't get damaged any further. After some back and forth, we agreed to stay until noon and then head back. We spent the next few hours fishing, drinking, and enjoying the day. We caught quite a few fish, even some big ones. The earlier tension eased, and I even started to relax. For a while, I almost forgot about the damaged motor and the strange noise from the night before. Time flew by, and before I knew it, it was afternoon. We should have left by now. I reminded the guys, who groaned but agreed to start packing up. Just as we were about to reel in our lines, Travis got a bite. His rod bent nearly in half, and he shouted that it felt like a big one. Despite knowing that we needed to get going, we were all intrigued. The fish fought hard, and we saw a splash from about 100 feet out. After several minutes, we saw it again, closer this time. A shark, at least 7 or 8 feet long. We were all excited, cheering Travis on as he reeled it in closer. He joked that we owed him drinks when we got back for catching the biggest fish. When the shark was about 10 feet away from the boat, we got ready to unhook it. And then, without warning, something huge shot up from the depths right under the shark. The water exploded as an enormous dark shape lunged at the shark, clamping down on it with its jaws that almost seemed as long as the shark itself. the shark was ripped in half in an instant. We were all frozen, staring at the water where the giant creature had appeared and then disappeared. None of us could speak. I couldn't believe what I just saw. It was another shark, and it had to at least be 30 feet long, maybe more. The whole back of it was this jet black color, like a shadow in the water. Without saying a word, we quickly reeled in our lines, lowered the motor, and got out of there as fast as we could. The damaged motor miraculously held up, and we made it back to port just as the sun was setting. That night, we stayed in a hotel, too shaken to talk. I pulled up my phone and searched for giant sharks in the Gulf of Mexico. The first thing that came up was the legend of the Black Demon, a giant black shark said to roam these waters, a creature out of nightmares. I used to laugh at stories like that, but after what I saw that day, I know there are monsters out there, things we can't explain. The Black Demon is real, and I hope to never see it again. My name is John, and I have a story that happened to me when I was a kid that I will never forget. My two best friends, Jake, Sam, and I decided to skip school and go fishing instead. It was almost summer break, and we were already in summer vacation mode. We didn't think that our school would even notice we weren't there. Sam had heard some of the guys at school found an old pond and had caught some really big fish there. Apparently they were massive, and some of them were over a foot long. We thought they were exaggerating, but wanted to check it out for ourselves. We all loved being outdoors, and going fishing was definitely top on the fun list for us. Sam said he had a good idea of where it should be, according to the guy from school. We had to go through some farmlands to a small patch of forest, and this pond was supposed to be right there on the tree line. We walked off a beaten path, through some fields, and finally reached the edge of the small forest and found the pond. While the pond wasn't exactly hidden, I could see how this spot could easily go unnoticed unless you knew exactly how to get there. The pond looked to be man-made, but yet you could tell it had been there for a long time. It was almost a perfect circle and almost went perfectly into the tree line that gave really good shade. We stopped on the side furthest from the forest as we wanted to get some sun while we fished. We set up our rods and began casting our lines, joking and laughing as usual. We were actually getting a few bites right away, but couldn't actually hook anything hard enough to bring it in. About half an hour later, Jake had finally hooked a small fish. He was able to reel it in pretty quick. It was a small bass, only about 6 inches long. While we were happy to have finally caught something, we were underwhelmed at the size, especially considering the stories we heard about how big the fish were supposed to be here. About an hour later, and no other fish caught, Sam noticed something. He pointed out to the far side of the pond, closer to the tree line. At first, I couldn't see what Sam was pointing at, but then I did. The water was rippling around as if there was a large fish moving just under the water. It was hard to tell from where we were, but it looked big. Sam looked at me and smiled. He didn't even have to say anything for me to know what he was thinking. There was a huge fish out there. Maybe the stories were true. We all agreed that it must be a huge fish and decided to move over to the far side of the pond under the tree line, hoping to catch whatever it was. We walked around to the other side of the pond, trying our best to keep an eye on the area where we saw the fish. The water was no longer moving, but we were hoping it was still close by. After a few minutes of walking, we reached the other side and cast our lines into the area where we'd seen the movement, but nothing so far. All three of us casted several times and got absolutely nothing. At least on the other side we would occasionally get nibbles, but there was literally nothing over here. All of us were getting a little frustrated. Sam then pointed out that he thought the spot where we saw the water moving around earlier was further out than we were able to cast. I looked around and thought he was right. While I didn't think whatever it was we saw was still in that exact area, casting out further sounded like a better idea than what we were doing now. I looked down into the water and realized it wasn't that deep. I thought I would try walking into the pond to see if I can get into a position to cast out further. I told Sam and Jake and started taking off my shoes. I grabbed my pole and started wading into the water. I probably got about 20 or 30 feet into the water when it finally hit my waist. As I was getting ready to cast, I heard Sam and Jake yell. I turned around quickly and saw them pointing at the water, still yelling incoherently. I tried asking what was wrong, but before I could, I heard something move in front of me. I looked back in front and saw the water churning about 20 feet in front of me. Whatever this was, it had to be bigger than me. Then it started moving closer. I understood what they were yelling, for me to get out of the water. The churning water started moving closer to me. I didn't think, I just moved. I dropped my fishing rod and ran as fast as I could back to the shore. I felt like I wasn't moving at all as my feet were sinking into the mud and I was stepping on rocks and branches. I was too scared to look back, not knowing if whatever was in the water was right behind me. I was only about halfway back to the shore when I suddenly felt a sharp pain on the back of my leg. Then I was pulled under the water. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I became completely disoriented, and I couldn't even tell which way was up. The water was so dark and murky. I felt a forceful tug on my arm, and it felt like something was pulling me deeper into the pond. Then I was yanked out of the water, and I was back on shore. It was Sam and Jake. They had jumped into the water and grabbed my arm and pulled me back. We lay there at the edge of the shore, panting, staring at the water. The shape didn't surface, but we could see it, just under the water, moving away from us. It was huge, much larger than any fish we'd ever seen, if it even was a fish. Jake then looked over at me, then to my leg and pointed. I looked down at my leg. There were 2 long gashes on the back of my leg. I'm pretty sure I must have been in shock because I didn't even feel the pain until Jake pointed it out. Without saying anything, both Jake and Sam quickly picked me up and pushed me away from that pond. We were in such a rush to get away from there, we left all of our fishing gear behind. We never went back to that pond. The mystery of what lurked beneath those waters was one we didn't care to solve. We never told anyone about what happened. Thinking back, we probably should have, at least to warn people not to go there. I really hope no one ever got into that pond after I did. I never minded winter driving. Growing up in Maine, I was used to navigating through snow-covered roads and icy highways. But that night was different. I was on my way to visit my parents at their winter cabin, deep in the woods of northern Maine. While most people flocked to Florida for the winter, my folks preferred isolation, snowstorms, and the sound of wind howling through the trees. It had been a while since I'd seen them, and with some time off work, I figured a visit was overdue. The drive started off fine. The roads were clear, traffic was light, and my truck, a sturdy 4x4, handled well. But as I got deeper into the rural parts of Maine, the snowfall thickened. At first, I figured I could push through. My truck could handle it. Then, the real storm hit. The snow came down in thick, blinding sheets, reducing my visibility to just a few feet in front of me. The road, barely plowed, was becoming impossible to see. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly, my knuckles white. Then, I heard a loud bang. The truck jolted violently. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. Had I hit something? A deer? A person? Grabbing my flashlight, I jumped out into the bitter cold. The wind cut through me like a knife, and the snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked around to the front of the truck. There was a dent, a big one, and worse, blood. My stomach churned. My flashlight beam danced across the snow, searching. No body, no carcass. However, I did see tracks moving away from my truck and into the woods. I couldn't tell what had made them, but it was snowing so hard that they were almost completely covered. I squinted, trying to see through the dense snowfall. Whatever I hit, it was gone. And then I heard it. A shriek. Not an animal, not a human. Something else. The sound sent ice through my veins. It was deep and primal, vibrating through the cold air like it belonged to something that had no business existing. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I sprinted back to my truck, jumped inside, and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I threw it into drive and took off. I was going too fast for the conditions, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. Then, there was another loud bang on my truck. The truck lurched to the side. This time, I hadn't hit something. Something had hit me. Then, before I could process what was going on, another loud bang hit the side of my truck, making me almost lose control. I clenched my teeth and floored the gas. My tires spun out. I wasn't moving. It was as if something was holding onto my truck. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it. A massive bipedal thing stood behind my truck. It had to be at least 12 feet tall, covered in thick matted fur, its muscles rippling beneath. Its face was almost human, but not quite. Jagged teeth jutted from its mouth, its breath steaming in freezing air. And its hands, they were huge, clawed hands. They were gripping my truck, holding it into place. I screamed and slammed the gas. For a moment, the truck didn't move. Then, with a sudden jolt, my tires found traction. The truck ripped free from its grip, and I sped off into the storm, not looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a small town about 20 miles away. My hands were still shaking as I pulled into a motel parking lot. I got out and checked my truck. 2 massive dents in the side, like fists had slammed into it. I walked to the back and stopped cold. My tailgate was down. There were smaller dents in the metal, like something had dug its fingers into it. I didn't sleep that night. To this day, I've never told anyone what happened, because who would believe me? Who would believe that Bigfoot tried to get revenge on me for hitting it with my truck? The Olympic National Forest has been on our bucket list for years. My best friend Phil and I are avid hikers, always seeking new adventures. We finally set off for a 4-day hike there. We were buzzing with excitement. The weather was perfect, the air crisp, and the scenery breathtaking as we started down the trail. The first day was everything we hoped for. We took our time on the trail and made camp a few hours before dark. By sunset, we had a fire going and sat around it, chatting and having a good time. Eventually, we decided to call it a night as we had another long day of hiking ahead of us. I can't remember when, but I remember waking up to a noise outside of my tent. Groggy, I assumed it was Phil moving around or something, so I rolled over and fell back asleep. When I got out of my tent in the morning, I saw our campsite was trashed. I immediately woke Phil up and showed him the site. We immediately thought of bears, though we hadn't seen any. We debated ending our hike early, but decided to push on. A few hours into our hike, we saw dark clouds gathering. Not wanting to get caught up in the middle of a storm, we made camp earlier than planned, just in time before the storm hit. We hunkered down in our tents, communicating through walkie-talkies. The storm went on through the night, and I found it hard to fall asleep with the noise of the rain and wind. Half asleep, I thought I heard something outside over the pouring rain and thunder. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out, but it was too dark and rainy to see anything. Thinking it could be another bear, I thought it'd be safer to stay inside. I reached for my walkie-talkie and asked Phil if he heard the noises too. He said he did. We decided to stay quiet and wait it out. The noises eventually stopped, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, I immediately remembered the events from last night. I threw on my boots and hopped outside. The ground was soaked, and my boots sunk into the mud as I walked around. Once again, things from our campsite had been destroyed. I know you might think that it could have been from the storm, but it was clear something intentionally went through our things. I yelled out for Phil, and he came out of his tent moments later. We looked around together, assessing the damage, and then we saw it. A large footprint right outside of my tent. However, this just wasn't any footprint. This footprint easily was 3 times the size of my own foot. Then, Phil pointed at something. It wasn't just one footprint. It was a set of tracks leading from the forest into our campsite and out again. The look we gave each other was enough to know our hiking trip was over. We quickly got our gear up and booked it back down the trail towards our car. By sunset, we were back at the parking lot, exhausted and unnerved. On the drive home, we couldn't stop talking about the footprints. They were too big to belong to a human and too oddly shaped to be a bear's. We never found out what made those prints, but one thing was certain: something strange is in the Olympic National Forest. And whatever it had been watching us and coming into our camp. We still don't know if it meant harm or was just curious. Either way, I'm glad we didn't get to find out. Working search and rescue as part of the dive team meant I was usually called in for one of 2 reasons. Either someone was trapped and needed to be saved, or someone was lost and needed to be recovered. More often than not, it was the latter. That's what I expected when we got the call about a missing diver in the Eagle's Nest cave system. The site was infamous among divers. It was vast, deep, and deceptively beautiful. The entrance made it seem easy, inviting even, but the further you went, the more treacherous it became. People had disappeared in there before. Some bodies were recovered, others never were. I hoped this wouldn't be one of those cases. We met the divers group at the entrance. They told us he had been there 1 minute and gone the next. They searched for a while, but there was no trace of him. That's when they called for help. My team suited up and entered the water immediately. We split into 2 groups. One would start from the beginning, following the group's route, while the others would start from the end and work their way backwards. Eventually, we'd meet in the middle, then retrace our steps to make sure nothing was missed. I had been through this cave system before, and even though I was familiar with the layout, I knew better than to let my guard down. Even experienced divers could get turned around in here. As my partner and I descended, the walls of the caves narrowed, forcing us to move in a single file. The water was clear, but the deeper we went, the darker it became. My flashlight cut through the blackness, sweeping across the limestone walls, searching for any sign of the missing diver. We reached a turn in the cave, where the path sloped deeper. I decided to check the bottom, scanning for the sediment of any signs of movement or disturbance. And then I saw it. A large opening in the rock. It wasn't on any of the maps I had studied. I had never seen it before. The entrance was wide enough to swim through comfortably. The darkness beyond was absolute, my light failing to penetrate more than a few feet inside. I signaled my partner to follow. We moved into the tunnel slowly, our lights illuminating the rocks around us. The passage stretched further than I expected, winding deep into the cave system. Then my stomach clenched. A dive mask. It laid half buried in the sediment, its strap torn as if it had been ripped from someone's face. I didn't need to check the name on the side to know what that meant. If the missing diver had lost his mask in here, there was no way he made it out alive. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, and took a slow breath to steady myself. We had to keep moving. The tunnel continued for another minute before sloping upward. I could see the surface of the water above us, a thin, rippling mirror reflecting the beams of our flashlight. We broke through cautiously. The cave we surfaced in was massive. The air was thick and humid, the rocky walls slick with moisture. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping water into the still pool we had emerged from. It was eerily quiet, except for the soft sound of water lapping against the rocks. Then I noticed something strange. The ground was disturbed, uneven. Piles of debris were scattered across the cavern floor, forming large mounds of mud, sticks, and broken branches. I took a few steps closer, my boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. A nest. An alligator nest. I'd seen plenty before, but never this big. It was enormous, far larger than any I'd encountered in the wild. And then I saw the bones. They were everywhere. Some were old, sun-bleached and brittle, while others looked fresh. Too fresh. Among them were pieces of diving equipment, masks, broken regulators, even a few tanks, corroded and rusted, but unmistakable. This wasn't just a nest. It was a feeding ground. My stomach twisted as I turned to my partner. We had to leave. Now. That's when I heard a sound in the water. I turned, my flashlight cutting across the pool. And there it was. At first, it looked like a dark shadow beneath the surface, then it rose higher. The massive ridged head breaking the surface of the water. An alligator, and it was huge. Its head alone had to be 3 feet long, its body stretching well over 20 feet. It was just watching us, not moving, not attacking, just watching. Then slowly, it began to sink again, vanishing beneath the water like a ghost. We didn't wait. I spotted a tunnel leading out of the cavern. It was narrow, but only partially submerged. It was room enough to run through without needing to swim. I didn't know where it led, but I knew one thing for sure. We couldn't stay here. We took off down the passage, our boots splashing through the water. 50 feet in, I heard it, a loud splash behind us. Something was in the tunnel. Something big. I ran faster, my breath coming in short gasps. The tunnel twisted and turned, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I scanned for an exit. The sound of something moving closer through the water behind us was growing closer. Finally, I saw it. Light. An opening at the end of the tunnel. We sprinted towards it, lungs burning, legs aching. The second we reached the exit, we scrambled up onto solid ground, into a swampy clearing. I turned back, shining my light into the tunnel. Nothing. It was gone. We called for an extraction immediately. A team arrived not long after, picking us up and bringing us back to base. Later, an investigation team was sent back into the cave. They never found the alligator, but they did find the nest, and the remains of more than a few missing divers. That day, we were able to bring closure to several families, but for me, it was a reminder. There are things in this world that we aren't meant to disturb, and I would never swim in a cave system again. I've been a fire tower watchman near Seattle for years, through every season. I love solitude, the sweeping views, and the sense of purpose. My German Shepherd, Tank, always accompanies me. He's a great companion, and I think he likes being out here maybe even more than I do. This was like 6 years ago in the middle of the season. We were settling into our routines as the sun started to set. Tank started pacing and whining at the door. I asked him if he needed to go potty, and he jumped at the door. I opened the door and he quickly bolted down the stairs. Usually when he has to go, he waits for me. However, I just assumed he really had to go and honestly was just thankful he told me instead of going in the tower, which would have been a nightmare to clean up since the floors were old wooden planks. I stepped outside, enjoying the crisp air of the forest, waiting for Tank to come back up the stairs. A few minutes later, I still hadn't heard him. I started to get a little worried and yelled out for him. Nothing. Getting slightly worried as this was not typical Tank behavior, I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the stairs calling for Tank. Then, I heard what sounded like Tank whimpering in the woods. I yelled out for him, running down the stairs, worried that maybe he had gotten hurt. I was about halfway down the stairs when suddenly he came back up the stairs, nearly knocking me over. I ran back up after him. When I got inside, he was hiding underneath the bed whimpering. I tried to get him to come out, but he wasn't budging. He seemed absolutely terrified. I needed to know what scared him away. With my flashlight, I went down the tower and looked around the forest, but also didn't want to go too far. There are plenty of animals in the woods that me running into this far out would not be good news for me. It was unusually quiet. Even the normal sounds I'm used to hearing every night seemed to be gone. Not wanting to be down here any longer, I decided to head back up. I couldn't have been more than halfway up when I heard a howl. Low, mournful, and unlike any howl I'd ever heard before. It wasn't any animal I knew, and I've heard them all out here. For a moment, I paused, part of me curious what animal this was, and the other part terrified. My flight response winning out, I sprinted to the top of the tower and locked the door behind me. I waited for a few minutes, waiting to see if I could hear the howl again, but nothing. It was just silent. Once I felt like whatever it was had moved on, I went back to Tank to try to get him to come out, but he still wouldn't move. I figured he would be better in the morning, and I let him stay under the bed. I figured I would get some rest, and I laid down myself. I passed out pretty quickly. I woke up from the loud whimpering sounds Tank was making from under the bed right below me. Before I could try and confront him, a loud creak from outside on the deck made me turn my head quickly towards the door. It sounded like someone was right outside. My heart was pounding so loud I felt like whoever was out there could probably hear it. I slowly got out of bed and looked out the window, but saw nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and started panning it around through the windows across the deck, and that's when I saw it. A giant wolf, far larger than any I'd ever seen. I mean, this wolf had to be 3 times the size of Tank, and Tank is definitely an above average sized German Shepherd. It was a blend of gray and white fur with a black strip down the center of its head. Then, it turned its head and looked right at me. I stumbled back from the window, knocking down things on the table. I crawled backwards to my bed where I kept my rifle. I grabbed the rifle and pointed it towards the window, expecting this giant wolf to jump through at any second. I honestly wasn't even confident my rifle would do anything because it was so big. I waited, but nothing came. Minutes stretched into an eternity, but nothing happened. Eventually, I gathered the courage to look out the window again, and the wolf was gone. No trace it was even ever there. Part of me wanted to go outside to see if it really went back down the stairs, but I couldn't pull myself to do it. I went back to the bed and sat on the floor next to Tank, who was still whimpering. I sort of scooted under the bed closer to him. I told myself it was to comfort Tank, but if I'm being honest now, it was more for myself. The next day I called it in. Rangers came out to investigate, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of the massive wolf I described. The Rangers acted like they believed me, but I could tell they were skeptical. But I know what I saw. Tank knows too. He didn't leave my side for days after that night. I'll never forget the sight of that giant wolf or that eerie howl that still sends a shiver down my spine even just thinking about it. Even now, with all my experience in the woods, I can't explain it, but I'll never forget it either. I've been urban exploring for years, diving headfirst into the forgotten and the forbidden. From abandoned houses and factories to ghost towns and caves, my flashlight has lit up countless stories left behind by time. But caves were different. They weren't just about people or the echoes of lives lived. They were about the raw, untouched mystery. Every dark tunnel, every twist and turn was a question waiting to be answered. So when Eric, close friend and fellow adventurer, told me about a hidden cave he stumbled across near Mammoth Cave National Park, I was immediately in. He said it was buried deep off trail, barely noticeable, and likely undiscovered. He hadn't dared to explore it alone, and wanted me to tag along. I didn't hesitate to agree. We planned, checked our gear, and set a date. The hike to the cave was grueling, an hour of pushing through dense overgrowth, navigating uneven terrain, and avoiding hidden roots and brambles. Finally, Eric stopped abruptly, motioning ahead. There it was. The entrance was small, barely 6 feet wide, a dark oval set into the hillside. Hidden by foliage and the natural slope of the land, it was almost invisible. I marveled that Eric had even found it. After a quick double check of our equipment, we stepped inside. At first, the cave was unimpressive, just a small chamber with uneven walls and the loose rocks scattered across the floor. The air was cold and stale, carrying the familiar dampness of underground spaces. We explored it for a bit, but it seemed like a dead end. Disappointment was starting to set in when I spotted it. A narrow tunnel at the back of the chamber, half obscured by a jutting rock. It was tight, claustrophobia-inducing tight. We'd have to crawl, stomach to stone, to make it through. I was ready, but Eric wasn't. He hesitated, shaking his head. "I'm not going in there," he said. He wasn't new to exploring, but tight spaces weren't his thing. I tried to convince him, but it was no use. Finally, we compromised. He'd wait in the main chamber while I explored for no more than an hour. If I didn't return by then, he'd call for help. With a nod, I squeezed into the tunnel. The walls pressed in on me, rough and cold against my arms and knees. The air was stale, and every movement seemed to echo. Crawling forward, I debated on turning back. The passage was long, the space tight, and there was no room to turn around. But something urged me to keep going. Curiosity, excitement, or maybe just stubbornness. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up. I gasped as I crawled out into a massive cavern. My flashlight illuminated a world that felt untouched by time. Towering stalactites hung like chandeliers, and stalagmites rose like jagged teeth from the floor. A wide stream bisected the cavern, its water crystal clear, and in the distance I heard the low roar of a waterfall. Then I saw them. The rocks. Embedded in the cavern walls were clusters of stones that glowed a faint, otherworldly blue. At first, I thought it was just some trick of the light, but when I switched off my flashlights, the stones continued to glow. It was mesmerizing, alien, unlike anything I'd ever seen. I glanced at my watch. 40 minutes had passed. I needed to head back, but I couldn't resist the urge to take a closer look. Maybe even take one of the stones with me. I approached the wall, running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface. The rocks were embedded deep, but I was determined. Pulling out my knife, I tried to pry one loose. The metal scraped against the stone, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling sound. I froze, heart pounding. The noise came again, louder this time, echoing through the cavern. It wasn't the waterfall. It was something else, something closer. Slowly, I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. just shadows playing on the rocks. Then my beam landed on it. Coiled around a massive stalagmite was a snake, but not like any snake I'd ever seen. Its body was impossibly large, at least 40 or 50 feet long, and its scales were black with streaks of glowing blue that matched the rocks. Its head was wedge-shaped, and its eyes fixed on me with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. I didn't wait. The moment it uncoiled and lunged in my direction, I ran, straight for the tunnel. Throwing myself into the narrow passage, I crawled as fast as I could, scraping my hands and knees on the rough stone. Behind me, I could hear it, a heavy, slithering sound that echoed closer and closer. My mind screamed that the tunnel was too small for it to follow, but I didn't dare slow down. Every second felt like an eternity. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on me, my breathing ragged and panicked. Then finally, I saw it. Light. Eric's flashlight was at the other end of the tunnel. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed myself forward, bursting out of the tunnel and into the main chamber. Gasping for air, I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the tunnel was empty. The snake hadn't followed. Eric stared at me wide-eyed as I tried to explain what I'd seen, but it was hard to explain a giant snake and glowing rocks. I could tell he was skeptical. I knew what I saw, but even now, it feels like a fever dream. I've never gone back, and I've never told anyone else where that cave is. Some places aren't meant to be explored, and some mysteries are best left undiscovered. It was Christmas Eve, and I was lying in bed in a cozy cabin my parents had rented for our family. The week had been perfect. Snow blanketed the mountains, and the cabinet looked like something from a Christmas card. We decorated with lights, stockings, and garlands to bring some holiday cheer into the remote wilderness. It felt like one of the best Christmases ever. That evening, we kept up our Christmas traditions, watching Christmas movies, baking cookies, and setting out milk and cookies for Santa. It was silly, but my family always leaned into the holiday spirit. Around midnight, we all said goodnight and went to bed. I wasn't tired, so I grabbed my phone and started a movie. About an hour in, I heard a sound above me. I paused the movie and listened closely. It sounded like footsteps on the roof. At first, I chuckled. It was Christmas Eve, and hearing footsteps on the roof seemed a little silly. My dad loved going over the top for Christmas. Maybe he was up there, dressed as Santa, preparing for a dramatic chimney entrance. I got out of bed and peeked into the dark hallway. All was quiet, the house was still. Then a loud thud echoed above me, startling me. "Dad," I whispered to myself, though I didn't believe he could make a noise like that. Before I could decide whether to check outside, I heard my dad's voice behind me. I saw him rubbing his eyes as he stepped into the hallway. I froze. My dad asked what was going on and what all the noise was. If Dad was in his room, then who, or what, was on the roof? I told him I thought that noise was him, and we both exchanged nervous looks. My brother soon joined us, asked us what was going on. We decided to investigate. Dad grabbed a flashlight, and the three of us headed outside. The night was bitterly cold, and our boots crunched in the snow. We shined the flashlight onto the roof, but saw nothing. My brother suggested we check the back of the house. As we rounded the corner, another loud thud came from above. When we turned the flashlight upward, I nearly stopped breathing. There, perched on the ledge of the roof, was a massive figure. It was humanoid, but large, easily 10 feet tall. Its muscular frame was covered in thick, matted brown hair, and its eyes glinted with a predatory intelligence. The creature stared down at us, unblinking. I could feel my dad and brother tense beside me. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence was deafening. Then it roared, a sound so deep and primal it rattled in my chest. The creature leapt down from the roof with impossible grace, landing a few feet away. My dad shouted for us to run. We sprinted back to the front door, the creature barreling after us. Its footsteps shook the ground, and a guttural growl filled the air. I didn't dare look back. We threw ourselves through the front door, slamming it shut and locking it just as the beast reached the porch. Its shadow loomed in the frosted windows. When inside, my mom and sister shouted as they rushed downstairs. They were asking us what was wrong. Fear flooded both their faces. Dad yelled out for us to lock everything. Panic set in as we hurried to secure the cabin. The creature prowled outside, its heavy footsteps circling the house. Occasionally, we heard it scratch on the walls or let out a chilling growl. In the living room, we huddled together. My sister thought it was just some elaborate prank until she saw the fear etched on our faces. The hours dragged on, each sound outside making us flinch. Finally, as dawn broke, the noises stopped. The oppressive silence was almost worse. A few hours went by, but we got nothing but silence. My dad looked at me. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was contemplating on going back outside to see if that monster had left. I nodded at my dad, and we both stood up, heading towards the door. Dad and I ventured outside, armed with nothing but flashlights and a kitchen knife. The creature was gone, but its massive footprints marred the snow. They led from the back of the house, circled to the front door, and disappeared into the woods. We didn't waste time. Within an hour, we were packed and leaving the cabin behind. To this day, I'll never be able to explain what we saw that night. Some people get a visit from Santa on Christmas Eve. We got a visit from something much more terrifying. And no matter how much I love Christmas, I've never spent another one in the mountains. Fishing was good money. It wasn't easy, and it meant long stretches away from my family, but I had a wife who understood the call of the sea and kids who were proud of what I did. Still, I always told myself that each trip would be my last. Maybe one more haul, one more month on the water, and then I'd call it quits. But the money kept pulling me back. The guys I worked with made it easier. Hell, we were like brothers. We knew each other's habits, jokes, and fears. We'd been through some rough storms, but we always made it out the other side together. There was one trip, though, that burned into my memory like a scar. We'd been at sea for over a month, sailing off the coast of Alaska. The catches had been good, and the weather had been mostly cooperative. It was nearing the evening when I noticed the sky darkening more than it should for that time of day. A storm was rolling in from the distance. I stood on the deck, watching it approach, the clouds churning and twisting like they were alive. I could see flashes of lightning arcing across the sky, and each boom of thunder seemed to ripple through my chest. It was mesmerizing, in a way, the kind of thing that makes you feel tiny, insignificant across the raw power of nature. I don't know how long I stood there, staring. I could feel the wind picking up, and the first cold drops of rain hit my face, but I couldn't look away. The storm had this strange allure, like it was inviting me in. Then I saw it. Something in the water, just at the edge of the storm's reach. It was hard to make out in the gloomy and the spray, but it was big, and it was moving. At first, I thought it might be another boat, but there were no lights, no shape that I could identify at least. It seemed to glide through the water almost effortlessly. Joe, one of my crewmates, slapped me on the back, breaking me from my trance. He told me we gotta get inside, that the storm was gonna be a rough one. I nodded, but before turning away, I pointed out to where I'd seen the shape. I asked Joe if he saw that large thing in the water. Joe squinted into the darkness, waiting for another flash of lightning, but nothing came. He shrugged, looking at me like I was just seeing things. He told me to come on, it was probably just a whale or something. Reluctantly, I followed him back to the ship, but something gnawed at me. I didn't think it was a whale. I couldn't explain it, but the thing I'd seen was moving too deliberately, too purposefully. Inside, I tried to shake off the unease, changing out of my wet clothes. I was just pulling on a dry shirt when I felt the ship lurch violently, throwing me against the wall. My heart raced. It wasn't the usual pitch and roll of the waves. This was different, like something had hit us. Hard. The ship tilted again, and I heard a deep metallic groan from the deck below. I scrambled out of the bunk room and into the common area, where the rest of the crew was all gathered, looking as bewildered as I felt. We all argued for a minute over what it could be. One of the guys said it was a wave, but I knew that was too hard to be a wave. Something wasn't right. Then, another impact rocked the ship, this time more forceful. We were all thrown to the floor. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I'd been through some rough seas before, but this This was something entirely different. That's when I heard it. A sound I can still hear every night when I close my eyes. It was a deep, resonating shriek, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It vibrated through the hull, almost as if it was coming from the sea itself. The ship tilted dangerously again. A third impact felt like it was nearly capsizing us. I grabbed onto a pipe running along the wall, holding on for dear life as everything that wasn't bolted down went flying. My mind raced back to the shape in the water. Had it followed us? What could be big enough to do this to a vessel of our size? The shrieking sound came again, louder this time, as if whatever it was right beneath us. I could feel it reverberating through my bones, and it filled me with a primal fear I'd never known before. We huddled together in silence, waiting for the next hit, but it never came. Hours dragged on, feeling like days, and the storm passed slowly. The wind died down and the waves calmed. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. He said it was all clear to go topside. No one moved at first. We just sat there, staring at each other, afraid to see what was waiting outside. Finally, I forced myself to my feet and made my way up to the deck. I just had to know. The sky was clearing, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. The sea around us was eerily calm, like a mirror reflecting the storm in the distance. I walked over to the side of the ship, looking down at the water. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed them. 2 massive indentations on the metal siding of the hull. They were at least 20 to 30 feet across, and they looked like something had hit us with enough force to bend the metal inward. I stared at those marks, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. Whatever had made them was gone now, but it was real, and it was out there. We finished the rest of the voyage in a tense silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we finally made it back to port, we couldn't get off that boat fast enough. I was one of the last people to leave, pausing to take one last look at the sea. I knew deep down that this would be my final trip. I'd come face to face with something that night, something I didn't want to meet again. We'd encountered the king of the sea, and we'd survived. But I wasn't about to press my luck again. Not out there. Not with that thing lurking in the depths. Hiking has always been my happy place. I feel like I can be my true self and just enjoy the outdoors. There's a large national forest close to where I live that I would go to whenever I had the free time. I practically knew the forest like the back of my hand. However, one of my hiking buddies told me about a new trail that he had found and gave me its location. We decided to explore the new trail together. However, at the last minute, he had to bail out. I had hiked this forest hundreds of times by myself, and going alone was nothing new to me. After a couple hours of hiking, I came across a beautiful waterfall. It was like this untouched secret of the woods. I couldn't believe I had been here so many times, and this was the first time I was seeing this waterfall. I took a break, had a snack, and let my other passion, photography, take over. I probably spent about 10 minutes getting some good shots of it for my portfolio. I still wanted to explore the trail further, so I decided not to spend the rest of my day here and move on. About an hour later, I reached a fork in the path. I was really beginning to think that not many people take this trail, as there was no trail markers or anything really to show which way to go. It was also not on the trail map of this area either. The deeper I got, the more the trees and brush thickened. Visibility was limited to about 10 feet through the tree line. Even the trees overhead was making it seem darker than it actually was. After about another 15 minutes of walking, I glanced at the sky. I looked at the time and realized I only had a few more hours of daylight and decided it was best to head back to the car. I turned around to walk back and took literally a few steps before I heard a faint sound in the distance. It was a voice, almost far away enough that I'm surprised I even heard it. I moved a few feet forward and saw a small game trail that went deeper into the forest. I pulled out my camera and started snapping photos of the trail. While I was taking pictures, I heard a terrified scream. It was a woman's scream, and it sounded like she was either seriously hurt or about to be seriously hurt. I only heard the scream once, and then it fell silent. I yelled out asking if someone needed help. It definitely came from the way that the game trail was leading to. Knowing that this may end up being one of the stupidest decisions I've ever made, I decided to follow the game trail. I only walked about 300 feet or so when I came into a clearing. As I walked in, I saw there were 2 tents set up and the remains of a campfire. I was immediately relieved, as I was guessing the screaming must have come from these campers and they were just messing around. However, my relief immediately turned into horror as I got closer to the tents. The tents were slashed, the camping gear scattered everywhere. It looked like a massive animal had attacked the campsite. The only issue is that the largest animals that we have in the area are deer and coyotes, and I just couldn't see either one of them doing this. Then I noticed something even more bizarre. A large tree had been uprooted and slammed upside down into the ground. This was clearly not natural, and the strength it would have taken to do this is unimaginable. I ran all the way back to my car and didn't stop once. The second I reached my car, I called the police. They came, but by the time they got there it was completely dark. They sent me home, but first took my information and description of where the trail was. A few hours later, I got a call from the police asking me if I would be willing to show them where I found the campsite. I agreed, but I wouldn't go back out in the dark. They told me that was fine and to meet them out there first thing in the morning. The next morning, I was back in the parking lot. I honestly almost didn't show up, but if someone was hurt out there, I didn't want them to not be helped because of my fear. The walk back was so stressful. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, thinking something was going to jump out of the woods. I literally had a dozen police officers with me, and it still didn't help. Finally, I found the game trail and led them back. When we got to the clearing, I saw something I was not expecting. The campsite was gone. The tents, the gear, even the upside-down tree. Everything had vanished. Only the fire pit remained, a circle of ash and stones. There was also a hole in the ground where that upside-down tree was. The police told me they would be in contact if they found anything or had any other questions. I never heard from them again. Part of me thinks they thought I was lying. I felt so stupid thinking back on why I just didn't take pictures of the area while I was there. I just was so terrified it didn't even cross my mind. What terrifies me the most, however, is the thought of if the campsite was gone so quickly, whoever or whatever did it must have known I was there. They moved everything to cover their tracks. They probably were watching me that day. I haven't been back to that national forest since, and I never plan to be again. When I signed up to study abroad in Iceland, I thought I was just chasing landscapes. My degree was environmental sciences, and I figured a semester overseas would give me something fresh. Glaciers, volcanoes, untouched ecosystems. But as it turns out, what I found was much older and stranger than anything I could have ever expected. I arrived in Iceland during the late August. The air was brisk, but not bitter, and the sky stretched on forever, wide and clean. The family I was staying with met me at the small airport. A warm, quiet man, his wife, and their young son who looked to be around 9. They would be hosting me for my stay in Iceland. For this story, I will call them Dad, Mom, and Son. From the moment I met them, I could tell I was going to like them. They weren't overly chatty or fake friendly like you sometimes get with host families. They just had a calm kindness about them, like they genuinely cared. They did everything they could to make me feel welcome. Smiles, eye contact, offers to help me with my bags. They even brought me a homemade lunch for the drive to their house. Their home was about 45 minutes outside of town, settled between low hills and open grasslands. It wasn't huge, but it was respectable. A comfortable, lived-in place. The kitchen was spacious and bright with big windows that faced the east. And best of all, I had my own bedroom. It was simple, a twin bed, a small desk, and a tall dresser. But it was clean and warm, and after a long flight, that was all I wanted. But what really struck me was the land outside. I remember stepping out into the backyard the moment we got there, and just standing there. There was a wide garden off to the left, full of herbs and root vegetables, with little homemade markers poking up from the soil. A narrow creek wound its way behind the property, its banks lined with moss and low ferns. The air smelled like damp earth and something sweet I couldn't quite place. But beyond all that, what caught my eye the most was something a little further back. There was a stone wall. It stood about 5 feet high and stretched across the back edge of their property. Built from heavy rounded rocks, it was clearly very old, maybe even ancient. And right in the middle of it, centered perfectly, was a narrow stone doorway. It didn't have a door, just an arch opening that led straight into a thick wall of trees. The forest behind it was dense and dark, with trunks that leaned and twisted, branches that tangled together like knots. It was beautiful, mysterious in that fairy tale kind of way. I stood there for a while, just taking it in. That's when my host told me the only rule of the house: I wasn't allowed to go into the forest. They said it was dangerous, and that there were animals in there that I wouldn't want to encounter. I remember nodding, saying I understood, but in the back of my mind, something didn't quite line up. As far as I knew, Iceland didn't have any large predators, maybe some Arctic foxes, but those weren't known to stalk people. Still, I wasn't about to be rude. I respected their house, their land, their rules. Later that evening, Mom made dinner: roasted lamb, root vegetables, a thick bread that she baked herself. We sat around the table and chatted. They asked me about America, my school, and what I hoped to learn while I was here. It was the kind of conversation that made you feel at home. After a while, I excused myself, said goodnight, and went to get my room set up. That's when I noticed something outside. My window overlooked the backyard and gave me a clear view of the stone wall. At first, I thought I was imagining the movement, just the wind maybe, but no, it was Mom. She was walking slowly towards the forest, carrying a basket. I watched as she reached the stone doorway. From what I could tell, she took a few things from the basket and placed them at the threshold, right in front of the opening. Then she stood there for a moment, unmoving, before turning around and heading back towards the house. It struck me as odd, but I didn't want to overthink it. Maybe it was some kind of composting thing or food for wildlife. I changed clothes, climbed into bed, and eventually fell asleep. A few days later, I came home late from class. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the property. As I walked up the driveway, I saw Dad in the distance. He was coming from the direction of the forest, and he was holding a basket, just like his wife had been. I said hello and asked what he was up to. He smiled and said he was just taking a walk. I pointed to the basket, curious, and asked what was in it. Without missing a beat, he changed the subject, asked how my day at school was going. I knew better than to press the issue. If he didn't want to tell me, he didn't have to. But the whole thing was starting to feel strange. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stood at the window for a long time, staring at the stone door, wondering what the family was doing out there. What were they leaving? Why were they so secretive? I wasn't an adventurous person by nature, but something about that forest was starting to dig under my skin. And then I saw it. Something small moved in front of the doorway. I blinked, leaned in closer to the window. It was too far away, and whatever it was too small to see clearly, but something was definitely there. It darted forward, paused, and disappeared into the trees again. I know how it sounds, but I swear it looked like a little person, not a child, something smaller, maybe 2 feet tall at most. It only lasted a few seconds, then it was gone. I told myself it was a bird, or maybe a rabbit, or maybe even a trick of the light. I got into bed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. The next morning over breakfast, I casually mentioned that I thought I saw something near the stone door the night before. Dad and Mom froze. Just for a second, but I saw it. They exchanged a glance. Then Mom said it was probably just the rabbits. She told me they sometimes left food out there for them. It kind of made sense. That would explain the baskets. But what I saw didn't look like a rabbit. Before I could say anything else, the son spoke up. He said they weren't rabbits. Immediately, Mom stood and told him to wash his hands and start his chores. He tried to argue, but she shut him down. The boy stormed off. I wanted to ask more, but clearly that wasn't the right moment. Later that day, I saw the son outside playing. His parents weren't around. He was sitting in the grass with a small collection of wooden toys, hand-carved horses, carts, and people. They were beautiful, intricate. Someone had spent a lot of time on them. I sat next to him and made small talk. Then, gently, I asked what he meant at breakfast, that they weren't rabbits. He hesitated. He looked around, then whispered that he wasn't supposed to talk about it. I promised him I wouldn't say anything to his parents. He said they were called the Hulu folk. I asked him what that was. He said they were the little people that lived in the forest. I didn't understand. I was about to ask him more when his mom shouted from the house, calling him inside. Without another word, he grabbed his toys and ran. As he did, he left one of his toys behind, a small wooden horse, beautifully carved and polished. I picked it up and slipped it into my jacket pocket. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Hoodoo folk? I'd never heard that word before. After dinner, I said I was heading to bed, went to my room, pulled out my laptop, and started digging. What I found stunned me. The hoodoo folk are part of Icelandic folklore. Their name literally means hidden people. According to legend, they're small human-like beings who live in rocks, hills, and forests, especially places that appear untouched. They're said to be invisible to most people, only revealing themselves to a select few. Sometimes they're helpful, other times not so much. What surprised me the most wasn't just the stories, but how seriously Icelanders seem to take them. There are organizations that consult with construction companies and governments to ensure roads and buildings don't disturb the hidden people's dwellings. Some projects have even been rerouted altogether because of this. It was wild. I couldn't believe it. And yet, the pieces were starting to fall into place. The baskets, the secrecy, the rule about the forest. Even with all of that, I couldn't bring myself to believe that there were actual tiny people living out there. But I also couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. I lay in bed for hours, tossing and turning. Eventually, I sat up and looked out the window again. The stone door was there, still and quiet. But something about it felt different now, charged, like it was watching me. I knew it was a bad idea, but I had to see it for myself. I don't know what came over me that night. Maybe it was the weight of the unanswered questions piling up day after day. Maybe it was the strange stories, or the boy's warning, or what I had seen moving out there in the dark. Maybe it was that creeping curiosity, the kind that whispers in the back of your mind, telling you that some doors were meant to be open. Whatever the reason, I found myself slipping on my coat and quietly easing out the back door. The night air was cold against my face, and the only sound I could hear was the faint rush of the creek beyond the garden. I didn't bring much with me, just my phone, which I tucked into my jacket pocket, and a growing sense that I might be making a huge mistake. I stayed low as I moved across the yard, careful not to make any noise. The moon was high enough to cast a soft glow over everything, and I could just make the outline out of the stone doorway in the distance. I crept behind a bush a few feet from it and crouched low, peering out towards the opening. For a while, there was nothing, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My legs started to cramp, and I was just about to give up and go back inside, when something shifted near the stones. Something was moving. It wasn't a rabbit. I could tell that much right away. Whatever it was upright, walking on two legs. Small, but not in the way a child is small. Compact, quick. Just as I leaned forward for a better look, it slipped out of sight behind the wall. That was when my curiosity completely overrode my sense. I moved slowly towards the doorway. The grass felt wet under my shoes, and every step seemed impossibly loud. My heart was pounding in my ears. When I reached the stones, I paused. From up close, the structure looked even older. The rocks were worn and rough, moss clinging to the crevices. It felt like I was standing in front of something ancient. I leaned forward and looked through. Nothing, just forest, trees, twisted and dark, standing like quiet sentinels on the other side. It didn't feel inviting. In fact, every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and go back inside, but I didn't. I stepped through the doorway. The forest was immediately different. The air was colder, heavier. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, the narrow beam barely cutting through the shadows. The trees were packed tight, their limbs reaching out in every direction. Every sound was amplified, the creak of wood, the crunch of dead leaves under my boots. And then I felt it. A sudden, sharp pain in my leg, so strong and unexpected it knocked me to the ground. I let out a gasp, clutching at my thigh. When I looked down, I froze. A wooden shaft was sticking out of my leg. My fingers wrapped around it and I pulled, gritting my teeth through the pain. When it came free, I realized it was a spear. Not a full-sized one, but small, no longer than my forearm. The tip had been carved from wood and sharpened into a fine point. Someone had made this. It wasn't a branch or some natural accident. This had been crafted. I tried to stand, but the pain forced me back to the ground. My leg wasn't broken, but it was bleeding and throbbing. I knew I had to get out of the forest. I started crawling back towards the doorway, dragging myself through the underbrush. Then I stopped. I heard it, whispering. Soft, unintelligible voices. It wasn't one person, it was many, all speaking at once in a language I didn't understand. The whispers seemed to be coming from every direction, like the forest itself was speaking. Then I saw them, eyes, dozen of them, glowing faintly in the dark. All of them staring at me. Panic set in. I forced myself to my feet, hobbling as fast as I could towards the stone wall. Then, another sharp pain, this time in my other thigh. I screamed, falling again. Another spear, just like the first. I pulled it out with shaking hands, the pain blinding. And then I saw him. A man, or at least something like a man. He stood maybe 2.5 feet tall. His skin was pale but weathered like old bark. His beard was long and black, reaching almost to his waist. His ears and nose were slightly too large, his features exaggerated like something out of a storybook. In his hand, he held another spear, the tip gleaming in the faint moonlight. He stepped forward and we locked eyes. There was something intelligent behind his gaze, not animal instinct, not wild aggression, something ancient, calculating. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was going to kill me or drag me deeper into the woods, or worse. I reached into my jacket, fumbling around for anything I could use to protect myself. And that's when I felt it, the toy horse, the one the son had left behind. I pulled it out without thinking. I looked at it, realizing the only thing I had to defend myself was this toy. It was in that moment that I knew I was doomed. I looked back at the man, ready to plead for my life. And that's when I saw it. The man's expression changed. He lowered his spear and took a few cautious steps towards me. He reached out, his small, gnarled fingers wrapping around the wooden toy. He turned it over in his hands, expecting the craftsmanship, the details. Then he looked at me again. His eyes were no longer threatening, but curious. He said something, words I couldn't understand, but they didn't sound angry. They sounded appreciative, maybe. And then, just like that, he stepped back into the darkness. The whispers faded, the glowing eyes vanished, and I was alone again. I lay there stunned, not entirely sure if what just happened was real. Then I heard a voice calling my name. Not a whisper this time, a shout. Familiar. It was Dad. I turned towards the doorway. He was standing there, holding a flashlight, his face pale. He ran to me, grabbing my arm and hoisting me up. We didn't speak, he just helped me limp back to the house. When we got inside, I collapsed into one of the chairs at the kitchen table. My pants were soaked with blood. Mom rushed in with the first aid kit, and together they patched me up, cleaning the wounds, wrapping them tightly. I kept apologizing, over and over again. Mom scolded me. She said she'd warned me not to go into the forest. Her face was tight with anger, but it didn't last. A moment later, she softened. She said she was just glad I made it out alive. Dad sat beside me and asked a simple question. Why did it let you go? I told him how I had offered the toy to the bearded man in the woods. They stared at me, then they nodded. Mom said I was lucky. Lucky that I had it. Lucky that I thought to offer it. She said the Hulu folk accept gifts, but they don't tolerate trespassers. I never went back into that forest, not once, not for the rest of my stay. When I returned to the States, I never told anyone what happened. Not my classmates, not my friends, not even my family. But I think about it often. Sometimes when I'm walking through a park or hiking in the woods, I find myself glancing between the trees, wondering if something might be watching. I often try convincing myself that what I experienced wasn't real. Maybe it was the cold, the fear, my imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. There are places in this world we're not meant to step into, places that belong to something else. And when we do, we're lucky if all we lose is a drop of blood. I've never forgotten that forest, or the man with the spear. or the way he looked at that little wooden horse. It wasn't just a toy, it was respect. And out there, that's everything. Most people think firefighters only put out fires. While that's a big part of the job, it's far from the only thing we do. Over the years, I've responded to car accidents, medical emergencies, downed power lines, and even the occasional cat stuck in a tree. Sometimes people call us for things that aren't life-threatening, but they're still real to them. A flooded basement, a gas leak, a strange noise in the walls. You never really know what you're walking into until you get there. It was supposed to be a simple call, a routine check at an old woman's house. She had left her cellar doors open the night before and thought some kind of animal had gotten inside. She locked the doors in a panic and now didn't want to open them, afraid of what might be waiting on the other side. I rode out with my partner in the station's pickup truck, both of us joking along the way about what we might find. A raccoon, a possum, maybe even a stray dog. It was a 10-minute drive, and by the time we pulled up, we had convinced ourselves it was probably nothing. The old woman was waiting for us. She barely let us knock before yanking the door open and ushering us around to the backyard. Her house was old, the kind that looked like it had been there for 100 years, settling deep in a wooded area at the edge of town. She pointed to the heavy metal cellar doors, her hands shaking. She told us that earlier something had been pounding from inside so violently that she thought the lock would snap. I smiled, trying to keep her calm, though I could tell that she was genuinely afraid. People tended to exaggerate in these situations. I reassured her that we would take care of everything, and she handed over the key before scurrying back inside to watch from her window. My partner and I exchanged a glance. He smirked and asked if I was ready. I nodded, still amused, and unlocked the padlock. As we pulled open the cellar doors, we were met with a dark, gaping entrance. The concrete stairs led down into nothing but shadow. The woman cracked open her window and shouted that the light switch was at the bottom on the right. I thanked her and stepped forward, but then I noticed something. Long, deep scratches ran down the inside of the metal doors. I hesitated, shining my flashlight over them. My partner leaned in and saw them too. We muttered to each other, trying to figure out what kind of animal could have done this. Claw marks weren't unusual if something got trapped inside, but these were off. Larger than any raccoon, deeper than any dog. Still, it didn't change our job. We had to go in. The air was thick as we descended the stairs, the kind of stillness that felt wrong, even for an old basement. I flipped the switch. Nothing. The lights were out. I pulled out my flashlight, casting a narrow beam through the darkness. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, rusted tools, and cobweb boxes. We walked slowly, scanning every inch, but nothing moved. Then I turned a corner. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was curled up on the floor, massive and still. My mind registered it as a dog at first, until I saw the size of it. Bigger than me. Its head alone was the size of a human torso. A heavy, sinking dread settled in my chest. My body locked in place. Then my partner turned to the corner beside me, saw it, and let out a yell. He stumbled backwards into a shelf, knocking over a pile of tools with a loud crash. The noise woke it up. The thing stirred, its huge frame shifting as it shifted its head. Then, a low guttural growl rumbled from its chest. My breath caught. Its eyes locked onto us. Rows of teeth glistened in the flashlight beam as its lips curled back. I didn't think. I ran. We sprinted for the stairs, my boots pounding against the concrete. Behind us, I heard it move. Too fast, too heavy. My partner was ahead of me, already shoving the cellar doors open. I hit the stairs at full speed, but as I reached the top, I felt the air shift. It was right behind me. I turned to shut the door, but it was too late. The thing was already halfway up the stairs, its massive bulk filling the narrow space. I tried to run, but my foot caught on the uneven ground. I hit the dirt hard, the wind knocked from my lungs. When I looked up, I was face to face with it. The world slowed down. Its eyes were dark, too dark, like deep wells that swallowed light. Its breath was hot and thick. The scent of earth and something worse clung to its mouth. It opened its mouth slightly, revealing jagged teeth. I couldn't move. Then it let out a howl, deep and unnatural, rattling my bones. and just like that, it turned. In one swift motion, it bounded past me, past my partner, and disappeared into the woods. Silence followed. I didn't get up right away. My hands were shaking too much. My partner came over, helped me to my feet. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Back at the station, we told the others what had happened. They laughed. They said it was just a big dog, maybe a wolf, maybe a bear. We had been scared, exaggerated the details in the rush of the moment. But we knew what we saw. And to this day, I don't know what haunts me more. The memory of that thing staring at me, or the fact that it's still out there, roaming the woods just outside of town. My brother James and I grew up snowboarding in Colorado. We had the best memories carving down the mountains with our family. So when James suggested we get an Airbnb and head up there for a long weekend, I didn't hesitate to agree. I let him take care of all the details, and a few weeks later, we were on the road, heading back to the mountains we loved. After hours of winding roads and climbing higher into the Rockies, we finally arrived. The cabin was small, 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a tiny kitchen. No bathroom inside, but there was an outhouse in the backyard. It wasn't much, but we didn't plan on spending much time there anyway. By the time we settled in, it was too late to hit the slopes. With no cell service or internet, we passed the time playing cards and talking about the runs we'd hit the next day. A few hours later, we decided to turn in early so we can get a full day on the mountain tomorrow. At some point in the night, I woke up. The cold mountain air must have gotten to me because I needed to use the bathroom. Groaning, I got dressed and trudged through the house to the back door. Stepping outside, I was greeted by a gust of icy wind and snowflakes stinging my face. I switched on my flashlight and walked through the snow to the outhouse. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and sat there, half asleep, waiting to finish up and get back into the warm cabin. And that's when I heard it, a loud thud from outside. I froze, listening. Was it just the wind? Maybe an animal? Mountain lions and bears lived up here, though it was rare to encounter them. I shook off the thought and finished up, eager to get back inside. As I stepped out of the outhouse, I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me. I was only a few feet from the cabin door when I heard something, a soft sound like movement behind me. I turned, aiming my flashlight towards the outhouse. And that's when I saw it. Just for a second, a face peeking around the side of the outhouse before quickly ducking out of sight. My heart skipped a beat. I called out for James, half expecting him to be playing a prank. I said it wasn't funny and he needed to come out. I walked a few steps towards the outhouse, calling his name again. Nothing. No response. Annoyed, I told him to freeze out there, and then turned back to the door to go inside. But as I reached the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was James, standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking confused. He had clearly just woken up. He asked what I was doing outside and why I was yelling for him. If that wasn't James I saw, then who did I see? I spun around, pointing my flashlight back at the outhouse. Nothing. The face was gone. Trembling, I ran back into the cabin and slammed the door behind me. I told James what I had seen, and at first he thought I was messing with him. But when he saw the look on my face, he took me seriously. He said if someone was out there, we needed to go check. He said they could be hurt or lost. If that was the case, why didn't they come out when I called to them? Still, James insisted we check it out. He threw on some clothes, and together we headed back towards the outhouse. I pointed to where I'd seen the face. As we got closer, we noticed something in the snow. Tracks. Big ones. Human-like, but easily twice the size of any normal foot. We stared at the prints, then at each other, fear creeping into our eyes. I told James we needed to get back inside. He nodded in agreement. We turned to head back to the cabin, but our flashlights illuminated something that stopped us cold. Blocking the path to the cabin was a massive figure. It looked human, but was covered in hair from head to toe. I didn't need to think twice. I knew exactly what I was looking at. Bigfoot. It let out a bone-chilling shriek, and then it charged. I grabbed James, and we bolted for the outhouse, slamming the door just as the creature crashed into it. The walls rattled, and I thought the whole structure might come down. We huddled together on the floor, bracing for the next attack. Another ear-piercing scream, then silence. We stayed there for what felt like an eternity, too scared to move. Finally, after about an hour of hearing nothing, we gathered the courage to crack open the door. The snow outside was still, undisturbed, as if the creature had never been there. We ran for the cabin, threw our things into the car, and drove off as fast as we could. Neither of us looked back. When we told our friends and family about what had happened, no one believed us. They laughed it off, calling it a wild story. But James and I know the truth. We haven't been back to that mountain since, and we don't plan to. The idea of hiking a stretch of the Appalachian Trail had always been appealing to us. My girlfriend Amy and I, along with my best friend Brandon and his girlfriend Lisa, loved the outdoors and had done countless trips like this before. This particular hike in Kentucky was supposed to be a quick adventure. 2 days on the trail with a single night of camping. Nothing new for experienced hikers like us. The first day was perfect. We parked the car, double-checked our supplies, and hit the trail early. The path was rocky, winding through lush greenery, waterfalls, and caves. By mid-afternoon, we'd already covered more than half the distance. Around 6 p.m., I suggested we stop and set up camp for a while we still had daylight. The others agreed, and after some discussion, we spotted what looked like a clearing off the trail. It wasn't much of a clearing, but when we got closer, Amy heard the sound of water nearby. Following it, we found a beautiful waterfall cascading down about a 50-foot stone wall into a clear pond. The area was surrounded by vibrant greenery, and to the west of the waterfall was a flat, open space, perfect for our tents. We set up camp, started a fire, and relaxed. While Brandon cooked dinner, I wandered to the waterfall to take some photos. And that's when I noticed it. Behind the curtain of falling water was a dark opening, a cave. There was no way to get to it without getting drenched, so I let it go. When Amy joined me, I showed her the cave. She thought it was cool and suggested we come back someday to explore it. We headed back to the fire, ate dinner, and soon called it a night. Amy and I crawled into our tent, exhausted from the day. I barely remember lying down before I was out cold. At some point during the night, Amy shook me awake. She asked if I had heard that sound. I looked at Amy, confused. I still wasn't completely awake. I asked her what was wrong. She then said she thought she heard someone outside. Her voice was trembling. I listened, straining my ears in the silence. But then I heard it, rustling, the sound of someone moving around our campsite. I told her it was probably just Brandon or Lisa. Amy shook her head no. She said they wouldn't be going through our stuff. And that's when I realized Amy was right. The sound wasn't coming from their tent. It was near our gear. Uneasy, I slipped on my shoes and unzipped the tent, flashlight in hand. The cool night air hit me as I stepped out and scanned the area. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I caught movement near Brandon and Lisa's tent. Thinking it was Brandon, I pointed my flashlight towards the tent and froze. It wasn't Brandon. It was a man. He looked wild, his clothes a patchwork of animal skins and rags, his hair tangled and filthy. His face was unshaven, and his eyes, they weren't right. They were hollow, emotionless, like he wasn't fully human. He had one foot inside Brandon and Lisa's tent when my flashlight caught him. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both frozen. Then I found my voice. I yelled at him to get out of here. Lisa screamed from inside the tent, and Brandon burst out, startling the man. He let a guttural yell and bolted towards the pond. Brandon and I chased after him, adrenaline overriding fear. We stopped at the water's edge as the man dove in, swimming towards the cave behind the waterfall. Brandon shouted at him, but the man didn't respond, at least not with words. He turned back to face us, standing waist deep in the water. and let out another eerie yell. From somewhere deep within the cave, more voices echoed back. It was like a call and response. Dozens of voices, all unintelligible but filled with a primal intensity. The man in the water stood there, motionless, as if waiting for something. Brandon said we needed to get out of there now. We ran back to the campsite, shouting for Amy and Lisa to pack up. There was no time to explain. We grabbed only what we absolutely needed and sprinted back to the trail, leaving our tents and most of our gear behind. After what felt like an eternity, we finally got enough cell service to call the police. We told them everything and they agreed to meet us near the trailhead. We led them back to the campsite, and the scene was horrifying. Our camp was destroyed, tent slashed, supplies scattered. It was as if someone, or something, had gone through everything with a vengeance. The police checked the cave, but no one was there. They did find signs that someone had been living there, remnants of a fire, scraps of food, and makeshift bedding. One officer said the cave was large enough to house several people. When I got home, I started researching the area, and that's when I came across stories about hikers going missing on that stretch of trail. Local legends spoke of feral people, humans who had abandoned society to live primitively in the wilderness. Some accounts described them as harmless, while others told of violence and disappearances. I used to think those stories were just folklore, but after that night, I believe. We were lucky to get out of there. I don't know how many of them were in that cave, but I'm grateful we never found out. I remembered my childhood being filled with trips out on the water with my dad. Those boating trips were the highlight of my summers. There was something magical about the ocean. The smell of the salt in the air, the rhythmic sound of the waves against the hull, the sense of endless adventures. My dad always said the sea was in our blood, and I believed him. As I grew older, my love for the ocean only deepened. I spent as much time as I could near the water, dreaming of one day having a boat of my own. A few years ago, I found an old sailboat in terrible condition. It was barely more than a wreck, but I saw potential in it. I bought it for next to nothing and dedicated myself to restoring it. For about a year, I poured every spare moment into bringing that boat back to life. I patched up the hull, replaced the rigging, and rebuilt the cabin. When it was finally finished, it looked like a brand new vessel. I was proud, and I couldn't wait to take it out to the water. One of my long-held dreams was a sail from Newport, Rhode Island, all the way to the Virgin Islands. I had a good friend who lived down there, and I thought it'd be the perfect excuse for a visit. But more importantly, it would be an incredible adventure, a real test of my sailing skills, and a chance to spend some quality time with my dad, who had just retired. We prepared carefully for the journey. It would take about 2 to 3 weeks to reach the Virgin Islands, so we stocked the boat up with enough provisions to last the entire trip. After everything was ready, we met at the port and set sail. The first week was perfect. We had great weather, made excellent time, and even stopped to do some fishing along the way. It was just like old times, just my dad and me on the open water, with nothing but the horizon ahead of us. About 10 days in, we were more than halfway to our destination. One evening, we sat near the bow of the boat, watching the sunset over the vast expanse of the ocean. We were sharing stories from my childhood, laughing, and enjoying the peace of the sea. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my dad yawned and said he was getting tired. I wished him good night, telling him I'd be down in a bit. I wanted to savor the moment just for a little longer. The night was calm, and I found myself lost in thought, staring out over the water. Suddenly, a loud splash broke the silence. It sounded like it came from the other side of the boat. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across the water, but saw nothing. Everything was still. Disappointed, I figured it must have been a fish or maybe a piece of driftwood hitting the side of the boat. After a few more minutes, I decided it was time for bed. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. My dad was already up, brewing a pot. We took our cups on the deck to enjoy the morning calm and plan the day's sail. After finishing our coffee, I remembered the splash from the night before and went to grab the flashlight I left on the deck, but it wasn't there. I searched around, thinking I must have moved it without realizing it, but it was nowhere to be found. When I asked my dad if he'd seen it, he shook his head. I shrugged it off, assuming it had somehow fallen off overboard. The day passed uneventfully. and by the evening we were back in our chairs watching another sunset. As we talked, I brought up the missing flashlight again. My dad joked that maybe a fish had taken it. As darkness fell, we decided to call it a night. Just as we were getting ready for bed, my dad remembered he'd left his book up on the deck. He went to get it when I settled into my bunk, closing my eyes to the gentle rocking of the boat. Moments later, I heard my dad shout. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the deck. He was standing at the rail, shining a flashlight out over the water, his face pale. I asked him what was wrong. He turned to me, his eyes wide, and said he thought he'd seen a person floating out there. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed another flashlight and joined him at the rail, scanning the water, but there was nothing. My dad explained that he was looking for his book when his light caught something, a face, just floating in the water, staring up at him. He'd only seen it for a split second before it vanished, but it had been enough to make him shout in surprise. I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but I could see my dad was genuinely shaken. We decided it must have been a trick of the light, or maybe his tired eyes playing tricks on him. We went back to the cabin, but sleep did not come easy. A few hours later, I woke suddenly, a strange unease gnawing at my gut. I looked over at my dad. He was sound asleep. I got up quietly to get a drink of water, trying not to disturb him. As I stood there in the darkness, I heard a faint noise above me, something moving on the deck. I froze, listening intently. Then, another sound, like a soft thud. My heart pounded in my chest. I turned to look at my dad, who was still asleep, oblivious to the noises. I crept over to him and gently shook him awake, motioning for him to be quiet. We both listened, straining to hear any sound. There it was again, a faint scraping, like something being dragged across the deck. My dad's eyes widened in alarm. I whispered that we needed to check it out, and he nodded. Grabbing a flashlight, I led the way to the deck. We moved slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The deck was eerily quiet now, but I could feel something, like we were being watched. I slowly lifted the flashlight, ready to flick it on at any moment. As we reached the top of the stairs, there was a sudden loud splash, like something, or someone, had jumped into the water. I quickly turned on the flashlight and aimed at the spot where I heard the noise, but all I saw were ripples spreading out across the water. Whatever it was gone. My dad joined me, staring out at the dark sea. We were both shaken, but neither of us said anything. We went back down to the cabin, locking the door behind us. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night, jumping at every creak and groan of the boat. When morning finally came, we cautiously went back to the deck. Everything seemed normal, but we both felt uneasy. We decided to sail for as long as we could that day, putting as much distance as possible between us and whatever had been out there. We sailed hard all day, not stopping until the sun was low in the sky. Exhausted, we anchored for the night. We sat together on the deck, but the usual camaraderie was gone. We were both on edge, glancing nervously out at the water. Later that night, I was jolted awake again by the same noises, footsteps above us, moving slowly across the deck. I lay there, paralyzed with fear. Then a louder thump, like something heavy was being dropped. I knew I had to wake my dad. I reached over and shook him awake, whispering that it was happening again. His face went pale, but he nodded, and we grabbed the flashlight. We crept up the stairs, hearts pounding, listening to the sounds above us. As we reached the top, I saw it, a dark shape crouched near the mast, moving slowly through the shadows. I flicked on the flashlight, and the beam caught it full in the face. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had the rough shape of a human, but its skin was slick and dark, like a salamander. Its eyes were enormous and bright yellow, glowing in the light. It turned its head towards us and let out a high-pitched squeal before leaping over the side of the boat and disappearing into the water. We stood there, stunned, our minds struggling to comprehend what we had just seen. My dad and I didn't speak. We just backed slowly down into the cabin and locked the door. We sat in silence, waiting for the dawn. When the morning came, we went back to the deck. It was as if nothing had happened, but we knew we had to leave. We raised the sails and set off, sailing as fast as we could towards the Virgin Islands. We didn't stop until we reached port. Once there, we sold the boat and flew home. To this day, my dad and I have never been back out on the water. We don't talk about what happened out there, but sometimes, late at night, I can still see those glowing yellow eyes staring up at me from the dark water, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting. I used to love Christmas. The magic of waking up to presents, the cookies and milk gone from the night before. It was perfect. I remember my parents made the holidays feel so special. But all of that changed one Christmas Eve when I was 9 years old. That night, I was bursting with excitement. My mom and I baked cookies, and I left them on the little table by the Christmas tree. She tucked me into bed, reminding me that Santa wouldn't come if I stayed awake. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I tossed and turned, replaying visions of reindeer and presents until I finally drifted off. Sometime later, I suddenly woke up. The room was silent, the clock on my nightstand glowing a little past midnight. I rolled over, hoping to fall back asleep, but then I heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from the hallway. I sat up, staring at my bedroom door. The noise stopped. I strained my ears, but everything was quiet. Just as I was about to lie back down, the sound came again. This time, it was more of a scratching noise. It was coming from the living room. My heart raced. Was it Santa? A part of me worried that if he saw me awake, he wouldn't leave presents. But the other part, fueled by curiosity, wanted to see him. I hesitated, then crept out of bed as quietly as possible. The hallway was dark and cold, but the scratching noise grew louder as I approached the living room. I rounded the corner, peeking towards the Christmas tree. There were new presents under the tree. I must have just missed Santa. Relieved and disappointed, I turned to head back to my room. But then I heard it again. The creaking, this time coming from the kitchen. Could Santa still be here? Curiosity outweighed my nerves, and I slowly made my way towards the kitchen. A faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and I could hear something rustling inside. Peering around the corner, I spotted movement. Someone, or something, was going through the fridge. The figure was so small, no taller than 3 feet. It crouched low, hidden by the open fridge door. I stepped closer, creeping around the kitchen island. My heart pounded in my chest. When I got a clear view, I froze. It wasn't Santa. It wasn't even human. The creature had dark, leathery skin and a long, hooked nose. Its ears jutted straight up, and its thin arms ended in clawed hands. It wore nothing. Its wiry body twisted unnaturally as it rifled through the fridge. I must have made a sound because the creature suddenly turned to me. Our eyes locked, its deep, black pupils boring into mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then it lunged. Its bony fingers grabbed the front of my shirt, pulling me towards it. I screamed, a sound so loud it startled the creature. It hissed, releasing me and leaping back. I fell to the floor, paralyzed with fear, my screams echoing throughout the house. The creature hissed again, before darting out of the kitchen and disappearing into the shadows. Seconds later, my parents burst into the kitchen, turning on the lights. My mom knelt beside me, trying to calm me down, while my dad demanded to know what happened. All I could do was point towards the hallway and stammer, "Monster." My dad ran off towards the direction I pointed. My mom carried me back to my room, whispering that it was just a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. Later, my dad returned. He told my mom he hadn't found anything, but his face was pale, and he asked to speak to her alone. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned the truth. That night, my dad had seen something. While searching the living room, he caught sight of movement near the front door. Before he could reach it, the door creaked open and he caught a glimpse of a small, misshapen foot disappearing into the night. He'd run to the door and watch as the creature darted away, its tiny frame vanishing into the snow. He never called the police. What could he say? That an elf, or something like it, had broken into our home? To this day, I still have nightmares. Christmas once was my favorite time of the year, and it now fills me with unease. I don't know what I saw that night, but I pray I never see it again. I'll never forget my first solo shift as a fire tower watchman. I had gone through all the training, sure, but nothing really prepares you for being out there alone. When I arrived, I had to get all of my supplies from my car. I knew it was going to take a few trips back and forth, and I already had gotten to a late start. I knew I needed to hurry if I wanted to get everything to the tower before dark. After my third trip back to the station, I managed to get the rest of my stuff and started heading back to the tower for the final time. I remember seeing the sun slowly starting to set, and even though I was exhausted at this point, I knew I needed to push myself as this area was known for its grizzly bears and wolf population. Finally, I saw the tower. I had made it, with probably half an hour to spare before total darkness. I had a generator at the tower, so I knew I could have a little light to actually unpack once I got up top. As soon as I got to the stairs, I stopped and braced myself for the long walk up. I was no more than 10 steps up when I heard something off behind me in the woods. It sounded like someone had stepped on a branch and broke it. I looked around, shined my light in the area, but nothing. I called out to see if anyone was there. There was no answer, just silence. Figuring it was probably an animal, I hurried up the stairs, looking down in that direction each time that I circled by that side of the woods for each flight of stairs I climbed. Once I got to the top, I started unpacking my gear and getting everything organized and cozy for the next 2 months I would be staying there. I got the small propane stove that they had there turned on to make some dinner, as the back and forth trips I had made that day had me starving. In the middle of me cooking my meal, I thought I heard a creak of the metal stairs that led up to the top of the tower where I was. I stopped and listened for a minute. I heard it again. This sound was familiar to me because it was the same sound I heard whenever I stepped on the metal stairs leading all the way to the top of the tower. Was someone coming up here? Maybe it was one of the park rangers coming to check on me and make sure I had made it here okay. I walked over to the door and opened it. There was a spot right at the stairs that was kind of open and you could look straight down the tower to the bottom. It was dark and hard to see, but from what I could tell, there was nothing there. At least on my side of the flight of stairs. I called down asking who was there. Nothing. Just silence. I waited for a few more minutes and called out again. A little spooked, I decided to head back inside. Assuming it was just the old creaky stairs shifting in the breeze or something, I decided to push it out of my head and finish cooking. I had just finished eating when I heard the metal creaking again, except this time it was much closer, almost if it was on top of the steps that I was just standing at earlier. I figured it was nothing, but just to be sure I decided to check. I turned on the very dim light for the outside deck and raised the curtain. Then I saw it, a shape, like a person, slowly walking around the deck towards the door. I don't know how I didn't scream, but I managed to keep it in. I quickly dropped the blind, honestly not even getting a good look at whatever it was. I just knew that they shouldn't be there sneaking around like they were. I quickly walked over to the door and locked it. Looking at the flimsy door and lock, I knew if someone wanted to get in, they wouldn't have any issues breaking down the door. Panic set in, and I slowly backed away from the door, not sure what to do. I listened quietly and could hear the slow but heavy footsteps finally getting to the door. Then it went quiet. I waited for a few minutes. These few minutes seemed like an eternity. Then I heard the footsteps slowly walk away from the door and back down the stairs. With what little courage I had left, I went to the curtain that was right next to the stairs to see if I could see who or what was just here as they walked away. I slowly raised the blinds. Honestly, I can't even begin to tell you what it was I saw. It was definitely a person, but if a person was twice the size of the biggest human you have ever seen. It almost looked like they were either wearing a really large fluffy hoodie or they were covered in hair. I also only saw the back of their head and shoulders as they were walking down the stairs at this point. I again slowly dropped the blind and went to the radio. I radioed the station and told them what had happened. While I did tell them the truth, I may have left out the part where I looked at the intruder as they were walking down the stairs. I knew deep down what I saw wasn't a human, and didn't want them to think that I was crazy and already having a mental breakdown on day one. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I believed myself. They asked if the person had left, and I said I thought so, but I wasn't sure. They said they would radio the rangers and have someone out to me as soon as possible. But it may not be until the morning, but to radio back if anything else happens. I sat up in my bed, listening for any sounds. No other sounds came. I was terrified, but finally exhaustion took over. When morning came, I jumped out of bed quickly as I heard my name being called from the ground level. It was the rangers. I ran down to them quickly. It was still dark outside, but the sun was slowly rising, giving a little more light to the area little by little. I greeted the two rangers and explained everything that happened. I did tell them about me peeking out the window and watching them leave, but once again did not tell them what I actually saw, just that it was too dark to get any details. By the time I was finishing my conversation with the rangers, the sun was almost completely up and we could finally see without a flashlight. They told me they would keep an eye out in the area and to be alert and to call back if I witnessed anything else suspicious. I agreed and left as I headed back up to the top of the tower. When I reached the top, I went to open the door to go back inside, but something caught my eye. On the ground was a strange structure made of sticks and leaves. It sort of looked like a Christmas wreath, but if it was made out of things found on the ground. I picked it up. It was very well made, but had to be handcrafted as I couldn't see any machine markings on it at all. However, the weirdest thing was that I felt a sense of calm, almost as if this was a gift. I went back inside and grabbed a hammer and an old nail I had found earlier that evening when I was unpacking. I hammered the nail into the door and hung the wreath on it. Every summer since then, I've returned to the tower, always watching the forest with a weird mix of feelings. While I am honestly terrified of whatever it was that came to the top of my tower that night, I also feel a sense of peace. It was almost like who or whatever it was brought that wreath to me as like a housewarming present. I've never encountered anything like it again, but that night stays with me. I kept a piece of that wreath as a reminder that we aren't alone as we might like to think we are.